You want your metabolism to be like a Porsche or a monster truck. You want it to run hard and then you want it to run out quickly. You don't want it to be a Prius where it's just kind of constant, steady. You can get all the way across the country on a single load of gas. So you want to be hungry in the morning, you want to be ravenous for lunch, and then you want to be hungry for dinner. There's the three H's, the happy, hungry, horny, that are all great signs.
Welcome to the Women's Bodies podcast, where we discuss women's health through the lens of bioenergetics and traditional Chinese medicine. I am your host, Dr. Susie Hazen. I'm a doctor of TCM, a mother, a wife, a former goat farmer, the owner and founder of Mother's Best Liver Pills, the only non-white label, 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef liver supplement. Women's Bodies. We are not small men, and we are never broken. Today I'm joined by Tyler Woodward. Tyler is a health coach. He's a fitness expert. He's an athlete. I would describe you as kind of like a physical culturist. I've been in Tyler's health coaching program, Transform, which is the program that was started by the Armstrong sisters with you, Kathleen Cohen, and now there's some other coaches. And I invited you on today to talk about men's health. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? And then we'll get into some of the questions that I have for you, because this is primarily a women's podcast, but we've all got husbands and boyfriends that we love very much, and we want to know how to support them and encourage them.
Of course. Yeah, so my name is Tyler Woodward, obviously, as you said, and thank you for the very kind words. I have been training myself for over 10 years now. I struggled with a lot of injuries. To start, I was very uncoordinated, so I had a pretty debilitating herniated disc for a time. There was a point in high school where I had to use my arms to get out of my desk because I was just in tremendous pain. I had a shoulder impingement. I had back injuries on and off for years. I was really tight and inflexible and not the athlete that I wanted to be. Then I went to school, studied biology for a few years, got really into Ray Peat's work with nutrition, ending up a few years down the line, teaming up with Ashley and Sarah and Kathleen. And now we work mostly with women, helping them lose fat, build muscle, and, kind of build the body that they want.
Awesome. You've been through a lot in your relatively young life, and there's no way to learn these lessons except by having these experiences. So when you were having these recurrent injuries and so on, would you have described yourself in a low energy availability state at that point, or was it a little different?
I probably would now describe myself as that, in the low energy availability state, or red S state. I was definitely under eating. I had really bad digestion, but at the time I was, 16, 17, a little bit in college as well, and didn't know any better and had no idea that, under eating was really a thing. Obviously, you hear about it in severe cases like anorexia, or bulimia, but you don't hear about just the athlete under eating as much. It's, I think, becoming a little bit more common. But yeah, my digestion was horrendous for years. I had digestive issues, which I didn't know. I was fasting at the time during high school, which you should just, I don't really think you should ever be fasting, but nonetheless, being a kid, you definitely don't need to be shredded as a 17-year-old, but there's no reason to do a cut. If you're in high school, you should just be eating enough to gain muscle, which I was afraid to do. So looking back, I would say I was probably in a low energy availability state. I do think as kids, you generally, or the younger you are, you do have a lot more buffer room because, there's no way I had low energy. Every teen seemingly has trouble getting out of bed in the morning. There's a lot of very normal things, but maybe those things are all more interrelated than we think.
It's interesting how the teenage years, first of all, you're growing. So your body is putting on mass. And it's not just muscle mass or fat mass, it's actually bone tissue, dentition, teeth, nervous system tissue, developing the prefrontal cortex, and really like the brain is becoming more, finally the neural synapses are becoming pruned. You're developing your reproductive system and your sexuality, which, then that kind of goes hand in hand into the psychological aspect of like, who am I? What does this life mean? Am I comparing to my peers? How am I comparing to the media generated images I see? And then as a teen, you're also getting more independence from your parents. So maybe parents that were kind of serving you all of your meals and in control of your sleep schedule, now they've stepped back out of a desire to let you become more independent and also maybe just pure exhaustion.
Yeah.
And so as a teen, you're having to try to make healthy choices. Also, maybe there's an aspect of wanting to have fun, wanting to have friends, wanting to go out and do some of these kind of things that are very new and exciting. And I would describe it as a real cluster for teens.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, it's a lot. And the under eating piece has really come home to roost for me mentally, because I feel like what I'm seeing a lot for teens, and I know this, we're going to talk about men, but we could also get into male teens because we've got a lot of moms listening today too. And this does count for girl teens too. I feel like a lot of teenagers, their cortisol is very upregulated because they are trying to perform. They're under a lot of pressure. And so when cortisol goes up, appetite drops, right? Because you can't be in rest or digest when you're in fight or flight. And the same stomach acid is made from the same biological products as cortisol. So when cortisol goes up, stomach acid goes down, appetite goes down. So a lot of teens lose their morning appetite. And then I feel like a lot of teens are almost in like a under eating binge cycle, because then you wind up like eating a whole box of crackers once your parents are in bed. At least that's what I used to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of people definitely undereat during the morning and probably lunch too, or maybe they just aren't eating the best quality foods. Looking back, I would love to have gotten more fiber, and I don't think I was getting enough protein, which is ironic because I was very adamant about consuming a protein shake every day, but protein shakes realistically aren't that much protein, right? Like maybe 20 to 30 grams now. I guess some of the ones
Yeah.
have 40 to 50 and the crazy ones now, but you still need to be getting like a peanut butter jelly in the morning with a protein shake is going to be 25 grams of protein. You're eating fried chicken at lunch, then you're getting another like 20 maybe. And I was 100, well, I graduated high school like 165 pounds. So wasn't that big of a human, but probably needed at least 120 to 130 grams of protein a day. And I don't know if there's any research showing that teens have a higher protein requirement, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think a lot of the issues we see, I had a ton of acne and things like that. A lot of it is hormonal, but a lot of it, the hormonal issues are also likely a result of your body not having the requisite energy and nutrients to process those hormones correctly.
Oh, wow. That is so really hitting the nail on the head there. So that is exactly how we look at it in traditional Chinese medicine, as well as the acne it's your body's way of almost like venting out extra heat and metabolic byproducts that the body wasn't able to process itself. So it's a way of the body finding balance, but obviously it's maladaptive, and it's hell on earth for the person living with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of acne in teens could be really remediated with more micronutrients, proper macronutrients, and probably better sleep and stress management as well.
Yeah.
So let's get into the guys, okay? So why don't I tell you what our husbands are doing these days? I would feel like for a lot of us, our husbands are almost like 10 years behind in the health sphere than what we are. So maybe 10 years ago, I'm 45. My listeners are, I don't know, in that 30-ish to 40-ish, early 50s age range, I think. Probably some younger as well. But a lot of us were, Weston A. Price Foundation, keto, carnivore, and then coming to the pro-metabolic, repeat, balanced macros kind of place over time with a lot of mistakes made. Oh, don't forget veganism in the early 2000s. So I feel like a lot of our husbands are honestly about 10 years behind. And as they're experiencing some health issues, they're like, oh, I need to fast and do keto. And we're all just like, what do we say? How do we stop this monster?
Yeah, been there, done that. I think it really depends on where they're coming from, and you have to address the individual. I mean, men in general tend to be a little bit more logical on the spectrum. Not always, but like you need more reasoning than emotional appeal in general. And so maybe your husband is the type of person, I think in general, like you need to find him a source that he actually respects and trusts and will listen to, because I've had this debate with my dad, and we were talking about the state of the scientific research, and I was like, well, have you read any studies? So I think you need to like talk to the individual. From a scientific perspective, I would say, so the question was they're not feeling good and they're like looking for keto and fasting.
Exactly. Yeah. We're seeing in the early 40s as the energy of use kind of starts to wane and you're just left with what like the actual truth of where your body is at. You don't have that same push through and adrenal impetus anymore. I am seeing so many men turn to as their first line of trying to feel better is they are turning to keto and fasting.
Yeah. So there's a lot of confounders when you talk about things like keto and fasting, because a lot of the keto crowd is very against seed oils, and fasting in itself is a inhibition of eating. So in relative comparison, you might feel a lot of benefits. And objectively, if we were to measure, you might be healthier fasting than eating the KFC diet, right? That could absolutely be true. And the same thing with keto, right? All of a sudden you go keto and you're eating Michaela Peterson's 3 pounds of ribeyes every breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which is delicious and has a lot of nutrient value. And for someone that was eating the standard American diet, which is not great, like the PB&Js and the fried food and everything from the freezer, which has a time and place as well, but isn't don't want to be the mainstay of your diet, you're gonna feel a lot better on keto. So a lot of times and you saw this, like I'm sure you at one point thought veganism or vegetarianism was the answer and you felt great. And then you
Mhm.
felt great on keto and Weston A. Price, and then you felt great on Ray Peat right now, which is like a more balanced approach. Hopefully the last diet
Well,
you'll ever really change to.
well, let's hope.
Yeah, but the point being is that a lot of times you go to one extreme and you solve some problems you were having, but as a result, create new ones. And then you go to keto, and now all of a sudden you're getting a ton of fat soluble vitamins, which you were missing, and you're getting a ton of protein, which you were missing on vegetarianism, high quality animal protein. But you're missing the fiber now, and other things start to pile up, and then issues rise about. So my answer would be I think carbs are really important, but people look at carbs and think cupcake instead of things like orange juice and fruit and potatoes. You also have to look at people's digestion, because I don't know how someone's digestion is, like your husband or significant other, whoever is listening. But if you tell them potatoes are good, and well, one, they think French fries, that's a problem. But two, like if potatoes wreck them, which they did for me for a long time, and like just immediately go into the bathroom, then they're not a good fit right now. And you have to consider that. So I think at the end of the day, the approach is you need to be consuming enough energy. You need to find foods that work with you in such that you can digest them, tolerate them properly. You're not sitting on the couch slumped 20 minutes after eating your lunch. And your body needs energy, and fasting isn't a way of depriving it from that. Keto, your body needs carbs as well. And if you want to have energy, your body mainly relies on carbohydrates as energy. Now, when you go on keto, obviously it changes to ketones because you have so little blood glucose that your body is now converting the, the glycerols into ketones, which are part of the fatty acid molecules. But preferentially, most of your organs, not all, prefer to run on glucose and seem to run a lot better with glucose, with adequate glucose in the body and adequate calories in general.
Yeah. Yeah. You are really so right about the confounders, which is if you're coming off of more of a standard American diet, choosing one of these more extreme approaches can still be an improvement over the standard American diet in some ways. Why don't we talk Let's talk a little bit about fried foods. You mentioned that a couple times.
Yeah. So fried foods in general, when you cook things at really high heat, which is when you cook things in general, there is a degradation of certain nutrients. And sometimes there's an improvement in digestibility of others. This is just a trade-off that we make upon cooking. It also usually tastes better, easier to digest in total. So you should probably cook your food. I'm not planning on going raw meat anytime soon. Fried food, there seems to be certain issues with it. Number one, the most common oil used in America today is seed oils. So canola oil, soybean oil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the seed oils tend to be higher in polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are fats that have two double bonds. So have two double bonds. And the way that the molecules connect, which is a chemical bond, double bond makes them very unstable. Basically restricts their movement, whereas a single bond allows them to move freely. You can kind of imagine this like usually with a single bond they're able to rotate around each other very nicely. With a double bond, they're restricted in space and they can't really rotate freely, all of the atoms and the electrons connecting. And as a result, it takes a much lower impetus of energy to break that double bond, which releases a free radical, and that free radical can go and attack other things. And it's kind of like a pinball machine. All of a sudden, a free radical gets released and it's going and hitting everything in sight, and basically everything it comes into contact with breaks.
Or
Then when you add in the high heat of frying and the starches, which are usually present, you make a lot of pretty negative byproducts from both the high heat cooking, the oils that are prone to peroxidation, and the starch as well, all kind of combined. And it's not the starch's issue inherently, but all kind of combined to be a not so great combination. And this is like deep oil frying. Then you talk about eating high fat foods, and the starch allows you to absorb a lot more fat with the food. So if you look at like a chicken breast fried in butter, and I mean like pan fried, versus a breaded chicken breast fried in butter, you'll add like 30 to 40 grams of fat because the starch just absorbs all of that fat. And high fat meals tend to cause some negative byproducts as far as like endotoxin, which is gram-negative bacteria that can pass through your digestive wall into your blood, which tends to cause a lot of stress there. It's kind of like a amalgamation of a bunch of different things that go on when you eat fried foods that tend to not be the best.
yeah, this is what I love about the bioenergetic, because it just takes what we always believed in traditional Chinese medicine and then puts it into, the terms of modern biochemistry. And in Chinese medicine, we say that we describe these foods as toxic. We don't use the word poisonous that much in traditional Chinese. Well, we would for certain things, but we describe them as toxic. So they're almost like unassimilable or deranging. We use the term derangement a lot, deranging for the body. And then we would also say that they create dampness. So that's our version of endotoxin. So it's like almost like turbid fluids rather than clear fluids that can be absorbed by the cells and the tissues and utilized for growth. These are almost like swampy, yucky fluids, very much related to that endotoxin concept, that need to be basically purged from the body. And obviously purging them from the body via the breath, urine, or bowel movement is a lot of work for the body. So yeah, we're just not a fan of fried foods. And, we're not talking about, say, just pan frying a steak or pan frying a chicken breast. That's fine. We're talking about like deep fried fast foods, basically, the kind of stuff you don't typically make at home.
Yeah. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with having these things once at a time. It's, the dose makes the poison. If we're eating all of these things constantly, it does add up. You also have to look at your goals. Like if your goal is you don't care how you look or feel, then you should probably eat as many fried foods as you want because they taste good. But if you're Brian Johnson trying to live to 200, trying to live forever, you should probably never eat fried foods, and most people land somewhere along that spectrum. So I definitely eat the occasional chicken tenders and fries. I generally try to avoid it, but I do think as long as you're taking care of your body in other ways, the occasional fried food is not going to do too much damage to you. It's really when it becomes your Monday through Friday.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely agree with you, Tyler. And I should make it clear, as we are kind of slamming fried foods, I do eat them occasionally as well. I will take my kids to grab like the chicken tenders at the grocery store or deli. If everybody's starving and you don't have a snack packed, you're going to be way too long between meals. It's definitely better to be fueled than not be fueled. And now a message from our sponsor. Do you know that your body needs the deep nourishment of organ meats, yet you haven't succeeded at cooking and enjoying them? Well, that's what Mother's Best Liver Pills are here for. I started this business 13 years ago as a depleted, exhausted, blood deficient C-section mom. Maybe someday I'll get into it and tell that whole story on the podcast. I started this business out of my own very deep need for replenishment. Before I took the liver pills, I was not recovering from my blood deficiency, and they were what made the difference for me. And that's where it all came from. So for women during all these phases of life when our bodies are giving so much, liver can help replenish a little bit of what you are giving to other people. Check out our website, www.mothersbestliverpills.com. Use the coupon code MB10 for 10% off your first order. As always, email me anytime if you have questions. And now let's get back to the pod. So I do think that is important, as we get into these more nuanced conversations about food. Just, we don't really need to have that kind of food fear and drama around it. And we definitely don't need to be starving ourselves to avoid certain things because, yeah, especially in my experience, a fueled body is better than an unfueled body.
I remember seeing Matt Blackburn go to McDonald's at one point. It was kind of let's say, like cleansing for him, like to eat McDonald's for the first time. People just need to get over their food fear, and I have been there too. I have pretzels sitting over there, and they have seed oils listed as one of the ingredients. But then you look at the macros, and there's 0 grams of fat per serving. So it's like, look, just because this has seed oils, it's imperfect, doesn't mean that this actually is going to make a quantifiable difference in my day-to-day. And I can tell you that if I reject eating these pretzels, even though I want pretzels in my life, and therefore I say, I'll just make them because I can make healthier versions. While true, doesn't account for the few hours that it takes me to make these pretzels every week, which is inherently stressful and adds a lot of stress onto my plate, right? Like I can't be doing other things. I could just buy the $2.99 pretzels and live with the 1 gram of seed oil per bag.
This, I think, is actually a big issue for men, even more so for women, because men tend to have a more active lifestyle where, a lot of women are either, you're somewhere on the spectrum of being a stay-at-home mom to an extent. And even if you are a woman who's working full-time, as a younger lady, I was before I had kids, I was still home so much more than my husband. It's just women's nature is more domesticated than men's. So men are out more. They're, they could be working long hours. They could be doing things like snowboarding or whatever. And so you're needing to find a balance between hopefully doing a certain amount of food prep and packing your food. Hopefully your wife or girlfriend doing it for you. Let's be real. But also not being afraid to dip into the food that's available in modern North America, not being afraid to dip into that with a little bit of discretion.
Yeah. I also think, like, I just drove across the country. You can make it work pretty easily, especially if you have certain places like Chipotle is not terrible, especially if you get, steak and chicken. Yeah, it's fried in a little bit of peanut oil, but okay, you got to make amends there. You can get yogurt at any grocery store. I would just go to a grocery store, or a lot of gas stations are now starting to carry like Chobani. And you can go and get non-fat Greek yogurt, have a few servings. Maybe you pack, and this is what I used to do when I would travel to the mountains. Like I would pack a lunchbox and I would bring yogurt thing of cereal and I would put honey in the yogurt before and I would eat my lunch there. I would pack that out, super healthy lunch. You can put an ice pack in there like a kid, and then you're getting, a great lunch and you're not also spending an extra $30.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you are just a guy, health conscious, eating on that more repeat-esque spectrum, what do you look for when you're out and you didn't pack food for yourself?
I mean, I think there's a lot of ways you can go with it. So I tend to eat on the lower side of like the fat spectrum, which is like I average about 80 grams a day. My calories are around like 3650 right now. Just trying to get those up. So it's about 20% fat, which isn't really low fat, but on the not keto, which is like 80% fat. So look, you can go get a steak, see if you can get baked potatoes if you're out and about. I think Chipotle is a great option. If a lot of cultures, if you look at their cuisine, they have pretty good options. Now, a lot of them have been Americanified. And what I mean by this is I went and bought quesadillas the last night I was in Mexico. This actually happened a few times, and the quesadilla is all meat with a little bit of cheese like baked in it, and it looks like a good amount of cheese, but it's just because the ratio of meat to cheese is very high in meat, and the cheese is spread out nice and thinly over it. In America, it's 90% cheese with 10% meat.
Uh-huh.
So if you can go and look at the traditional cultures and go and get some Mexican food, go and get some maybe Indian food, whatever it is, ask for extra chicken, kind of customize these things to make it on your side. Chicken's always a great one. White fish and fish in general tends to be pretty good. You can worry about the sourcing, but if you're eating out, I probably wouldn't be too concerned with it because hopefully you're not eating out most of the time. And even if you go to Chick-fil-A, you can get grilled chicken, not fried. So it's
Okay.
very accessible to make healthier decisions if you choose to make them. It's more so, in my opinion, that we feel entitled to eat what everyone else is eating.
Yes. Yes, I actually saw you making that point in one of your Instagram stories the other day. You were saying, you don't have to do things like everyone else. If you have I think you were kind of talking about your almost like your meal prep routine. You're like, if you know that you do well eating the same thing 3 times a day, you can do that. You don't have to have a different meal for every meal.
Yeah. I think that's one of the nice things being a man too. But right now, I have been thinking about this a lot. Like, I want to spend as much time on the mountain as possible. So if that means I eat chicken breast and rice every day, I'm so okay with that trade-off because I can spend 5 minutes cooking my dinner every night, have a really healthy, really high protein, like hit all of my goals, rather than spending an hour every night cooking. And I just cook a bunch of vegetables in bulk and I kind of meal prep everything for the week. And sometimes I'm gonna have like pizza and I mix it up a little bit. I have meatballs like meal prepped and do pasta or meatball sub, but everything has a trade-off. And time is a big one that people discredit.
Wow. Yeah, I do think almost time is our most precious commodity. It really is our time and our attention. And so, especially as you come out of an LEA state, you start thinking about these things more and making different choices that may be going against the grain of what society is doing at large. And honestly, it's like really liberating and refreshing.
Yeah, I think anytime you realize that you can make decisions that are of your own accord, it's a nice feeling rather than being pressured into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do think that's something, for you, being a more fueled guy and also a more like you've just because of the experiences you've had to become a more creative thinker. And, you just think like, where's that going to take you over time? Like, honestly, you'll probably be shocked in 10 years. Who knows? Who knows? So you just mentioned there you were eating 3650 calories.
Yeah, that's where my calories are currently at.
And how tall are you?
6 foot.
Okay. And is it awkward to ask how much you weigh, or is that okay?
No, no, I don't care. I currently weigh 188.
Okay, so you're 6 feet, 188, and you're eating two. 2,650 calories.
3,650.
Oh, 3,650.
Yeah.
See, my mind couldn't even
Yeah.
like,
So,
so
and that's on the low end. I'm trying to get that up. I basically cut. I think you were in that cut, right, with the Transform
yes,
group. Yeah,
yes.
and I got really, really lean. It was the leanest I've ever been. I was like sub 10% body fat. And the reason I say this is because I don't think I was mentally prepared to be that lean. I would have done it a less aggressive cut, and I would have done it over, smaller bursts, getting a little bit leaner, maintaining, getting a little bit leaner, maintaining. And I also didn't have the muscle mass that I wanted. So I've gained about somewhere around in the range of like 10 pounds since then. So that's been over 6 months, and not all of that was intentional. Definitely like went and traveled and needed to get my calories up higher before that. I was pretty miserable at the end of the cut. I was having a lot of issues. And so I think I needed to gain some weight. I wasn't ready for my calories to be that low or to be that low body fat. We'll try again at some point. We'll see how that goes. But now I'm taking it more seriously. I'm tracking my calories again. And then I'm going to try to get probably well above 4,000 this time. I'm also trying to gain some weight. So I'd like to be 200 lean, as they say.
Mhm.
So we're going to try to get up to that point and probably beyond at a very slow and steady rate, and then cut back and hopefully have an adequate amount of muscle mass for my taste.
Yeah, that's the discussion that's been very at the forefront of my mind and a lot of people's minds, is that just that concept of body composition and your lean mass as well as your fat mass, right? And we're wanting, just lean mass also includes your skeleton, your viscera, your gut, your brain, all of that, right?
Lean mass is everything but fat mass.
Okay. Yeah. So as a human, and this counts for guys and girls, wanting to be a healthy person, you want to have more lean mass and an adequate amount of fat mass for your unique body type, but certainly not an overabundance of fat mass, because when you are like, I'm, you know about me, you kind of know my deal. I think I'm about 45 pounds overweight, 45 pounds of extra fat mass. So this is like really impinging on my vibe. Okay. Sleep is not great. Body movement is challenged. Like I fell down skiing. I fell down skiing a while ago, and I was down there and I'm like, I don't know if I can get up, because like, yeah, I can get on and off the ground. Sure. But when you're skiing, everything's so much more awkward because you're strapped into your boots and your gear and all that. I did get up, but this is what fat people are dealing with, right? And the reason why I bring this up is because the reason why we want to have more lean mass with a healthy but more minimal amount of fat mass. The aesthetics are great. The aesthetics are totally a wonderful goal, but there's such a bigger goal, which is your health and your physical vibrancy and your athleticism, your movement ability. And then I also think it really improves your cognition and problem solving as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think most people, like, I would bet that you may not need to lose 45 pounds of fat. You probably need to lose, let's say, 30 plus pounds of fat, maybe, and then you need 10 to 15 pounds of lean mass. Like you almost definitely need muscle, because you can, the world's strongest man have a good amount of body fat. I don't know what body fat percentage they're at, but it's not 10% body fat. And
Yeah.
they're able to kind of power through a lot of things. Most people, I think women especially, older men as well, because they tend to be less active. And also, this can be anyone. It really depends on your history, upbringing. Because if you were a farm boy and now you're working in a 9 to 5, you're probably going to still be physically active in some regard and have a lot of muscle tissue remaining. But if you were just kind of a computer nerd, which nothing wrong with, if I was one at one point, you definitely need some more lean mass. Now, everyone, in my opinion, pretty much needs more lean mass because we want to look better. Like, I probably don't from a health perspective. I'm not going to gain a lot of health points from adding more lean mass, but to get my desired physique and athletic ability and maybe some cognitive improvements. I don't know. Oh, that's where I'm heading towards.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's honestly, it's really fun to feel strong too. Like
Yeah.
there's just the fun factor of it as well to feel strong and mobile. So why don't you talk us through a little bit about because you've been like, how do we describe it? Kind of engineering or cultivating your physique for about 10 years. So we're not talking about a quick fix or an overnight like deal, and I think a lot of the time men that are noticing themselves starting to gain weight, and I think this goes for women too, you're noticing maybe your basal metabolic rate is slowly decreasing with age, your activity is decreasing, everything's changing. And so you instantly just think, oh, I need to restrict my calories to lose fat.
Mhm.
Well, why don't you share with us kind of how you've been doing this in a way that, in my opinion, is a lot more health promoting and a lot more effective?
Yeah. So what I think you want to do, and this is simple but not easy, is you want to find, especially as a man, also as a woman as well, a little bit. You want to start because most people are going to be underweight, and I think you kind of want to be in a perma bulk. So you're gaining, let's say, a quarter to a half pound, maybe a little bit more for men, more on the half pound side per month, and you're just going to gain lean mass until the point that you are satisfied with your physique, because muscle creates shape, fat creates flab, muscle and fat together create size. So if you have this happened a lot with a lot of women in my life, like my legs are so big, I don't want to work them out. It's like, well, do they look like a bodybuilder? Like, are you vascular? Can I draw a map and connect the subway lines between the veins on your leg? If the answer is no, then you probably just store a lot of fat there. I store zero fat on my arms, which is great sometimes and annoying other times because I think I'm lean when I look at my arms and I look at my stomach. I'm like, why do I store all my fat there? So it has its pros and cons. And so you need to get ideally you want to get to a certain body fat percentage. For women, you want to be sub 30%, about for men, about sub 20%, and women tend to store more body fat. And should store more body fat. If you look at the leanest bodybuilders ever, like women are at never go below 10%. They would most likely die or have like very serious issues. Men are constantly in like 4 to 10%, 4 being very low. Yeah, and their bodies are able to maintain that due to our hormones and chemistry. So I think you essentially want to get to a point where you're well fed. That's going to be different depending on the individual. And then you're gaining weight at a very slow rate. Now, most people are not in that scenario. But if you can get to that, like you're not going to be in a low energy availability state. You're always going to feel pretty energized and well fed as long as you're eating high quality foods because you're eating enough calories and you're constantly gaining weight. So you're constantly in a surplus of energy. And this, to put this in finance terms, you're constantly making more money than you're spending. You're growing a little bit of a cushion. You're getting ready for your retirement in Acapulco. Oh, you're feeling good. The reality is that this is a little bit different for men than women. I don't, depends on the man, but like a lot of women tend to gain weight at some point. A lot of men also tend to gain weight at some point. I think it tends to be a little bit later in life from what it seems like. But you need to cut. You need to do a calorie deficit. The issue is that so many women and men are just not eating enough. I have multiple clients that are taller than me, way more than me, and eat 2,000 calories a day, and they're men.
Now, my husband is going to listen to this podcast, and I'm fine with him hearing this, but he's about the same height and weight as you. He's very lean. My husband's very fit. He does Brazilian jiu-jitsu and other stuff too. He does have a very nice, very impressive physique, but I would tell you it would be lucky if he's getting 1,800 calories a day. And then I'm trying to like offer him more food. Like I cook a lot. I pack his lunch. I really try to keep things ready for him. But obviously he doesn't always want to be like mothered, right, by me, which is great. That's awesome. But so can we talk a little bit about this calorie increase process? So say if a guy realized, well, you're doing this with your male clients. How do you say you've got a guy, he's 6 feet tall, he's whatever, let's say he's 190 or something, but he's eating 1,700, 1,800, 2,000 calories a day. Where do you start?
Yeah, so usually I want to get their protein to 0.82 grams per pound is a good estimate for most people. So let's just take a 200-pound dude. That's going to be 164 grams of protein. And
Yeah.
I want to make sure most of that's coming from animal sources. You're going to have to eat some animal sources to get there, especially if you're eating 1,700 calories or low calories. So that basically looks like probably pretty much a palm-sized piece of protein at every meal.
Uh-huh.
And you want to make sure you're looking at actual protein sources. Eggs are not a good source of protein. Contrary to the belief of many, they have a lot more fat. I define a good protein source as could you get all of your protein requirements, your daily protein goal from that food without going over in calories. If you cannot do that, it is not a good source of protein. So then I'm going to try and get your fat to about 0.8 grams per kilogram. So divide your weight by 2.2. Let's just say he's 220 for the sake of this example. That would be 100 kilograms. So that's about 80 grams of fat. And then I do the rest carbs
Uh-huh.
and I scale up by about 50 grams of between carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Usually, if we're hitting your protein and your fat, I'm pretty much just going to scale carbohydrates. So add 50 grams of carbohydrates week over week. And this is where it is simple but not easy because it's very
Yeah.
easy to add 50 grams of carbohydrates per week. It's hard to stick with that because it's a very small increase. And then two, there's the mental game of, hey, I'm bulking. It doesn't matter if I eat an extra 100 calories over or 200 calories over. And I currently, although I am a coach and do this and take a lot of people through this, I have the same mental battles where it's like, I can just eat a little bit more ice cream. I can just do this. And that is okay in the short term, but not so great in the long term because my presumption with your husband and many people is that they don't want to gain weight and that what has worked for them in the past is still working for them. And the issue is that it might not always. So if you can take this slow and steady approach and increase calories over time and making sure that your average scale weight week over week, so just measure 7 days in a row, make sure your average scale weight is staying within, let's say, 1 pound, not going up over time. Like write it down. It's 195, it's 187. Because if you don't write it down and it goes up zero point 0.1 for the next 8 weeks or like 6 months, then you're going to be at 5 pounds heavier, which means you've been in a calorie surplus the whole time. Now, if your husband has an impressive physique, if he doesn't want to put on muscle, then he wants to stay exactly the same. For some people, like if you could gain 0.1 pound of muscle per week, that is awesome. That'd be about 0.4 pounds. Like that's pretty close to perfect. I'd maybe try to be a little bit less than that. The issue is it gets really hard. But anything else, anything that I didn't explain
Yeah.
clearly? Or
So, yeah, I'm going to kind of just repeat that and then you can tell me if I understood that correctly. So,
yeah,
if you're working with a man who has, recognized either because his body composition is off, he's got too much fat, not enough muscle, or he's having other low energy availability symptoms, like it could be anything from just like overall poor mood. I think this is really common, just not a good mood, just stressed, grumpy, feeling a little chaotic, a little ADHD type symptoms. Or, even worse than that, we could be looking at some of the chronic illness, digestive, whatever stuff. So to me, those are all the reasons that a man might be interested in becoming more well fueled, right? Because the body is going to need this fuel to either build up to a higher basal metabolic rate so that you could do a fat loss phase or build muscle mass or heal chronic illnesses or poor mood or LEA symptoms, right? So what you're saying is that you would be kind of monitoring where he's at. Then you're going to try to bring the protein up, bring the fat down, have the carbs make up the bulk of the diet. And then you're going to start slowly building the carbohydrates at a rate of 50 grams daily per
50
week.
calories.
50
Yeah, so it's
calories. Okay.
like 12 and
So
a half
50
grams.
calories is about half an apple or three-quarters of an apple.
Not even, but yeah, like
Not even
yeah, probably about half an apple. Yeah.
half an apple. Okay. So, and the idea being that you're like I like to think of it as a fire, right? Say if you're building a fire, you start with small stuff and then you build it up to bigger stuff, right? And that's the same with our metabolism. When we want to build our metabolism, we don't want to, as you said, you don't want to start eating an ice cream sandwich every night, for example, because that's not gonna be great over time. But you could add in an extra half an apple to your lunch or something over time, and this is how we build it slowly without increasing fat mass.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a number of adaptations that happen. So one, your basal metabolic rate does seem to turn back on if it has been like lowered at all. So what I mean by that is your basal metabolic rate is if you and I just lay in bed all day and we binge watch, I don't know, whatever show is popular right now, don't move a muscle, don't even eat. That is how many calories you would burn. Is usually about 65% of your total daily caloric expenditures is your basal metabolic rate. How many calories it takes to keep you alive. That tends to come back on first if there has been any diminishing in the amount of calories you're burning there. Sometimes I do think it does take a long time or a few weeks for because you've lost digestive tissue and that stuff has to regrow. If it's been a long time that you've been in low energy availability state. But then you start to see adaptations to NEAT, so non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and I can see you doing this a little bit right now, like you're bopping around and
I've
all
gotten
the
really
micro
nerdy.
movements. Yeah. So
Yes.
that's very common when you have like if you ever watch Kathleen, who may or may not listen to this at some point, you'll see her like she's just kind of bobbing and weaving. She's preparing for her next big fight on UFC 300. So I think that's typically a good sign. You tend to start burning more calories in there, and then you also just feel a lot better. Like you'll have energy. Let's go for a walk. Let's do all these things that seemed like a drag before. And the 50 calories per week, yeah, is right along the lines of where we see people being able to increase without gaining weight. And I think your fire analogy is great. Like if I threw the chip, which is like I love a chip, which is like an ice cream sandwich, as you mentioned. But if you threw the equivalent on like your metabolic fire, right? It's just like you're throwing a big log onto a small fire, and you want to build the whole fire up, and then all of a sudden you can handle the chip witch. But you don't throw
Yeah.
that all the time. Maybe you throw some less sticks on. You take a few sticks out and throw this big log on once you've built up the foundation, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think especially maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, mm, a lot of women in my sphere discovered pro-metabolic eating, and then they just started slamming orange juice and ice cream, and that did not go well at all. And I
Yeah.
don't think, anyone who truly understands pro-metabolic eating or a repeat would never have recommended that, but that was kind of the takeaway from, certain health influencers who maybe weren't the best.
Hmm.
And also, just that human, I think a lot of women were and are, and men too, you are in an LEA, low energy availability condition. And when you start eating more, you feel so much better that you just can't stop. But you really haven't, unfortunately, you haven't had this very challenging but slow approach that's going to help you build energy and lean mass as opposed to just, putting on more fat mass.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, when they come into Ray Pete's world, which I don't love calling it that just because I don't know if this is the direction that he would have wanted people to go. So
Sure.
it's hard to, the guy was the GOAT, so don't want to say his name in vain in any way. But a lot of people just add add carbs without lowering their fat. So they don't titrate off one and onto the other. They add a lot of calories all at once. And it's because we lived in a black and white world. Like now orange juice is good, before it was bad. So I can eat as much orange juice as I thought. And I thought the same thing. Oh, whole milk is good. skim milk is bad. You can definitely, if there's one thing you can take away here, you can get fat eating healthy foods. Absolutely. That is the reality. It doesn't matter if it's Ashley and Sarah's Nourish, like the highest quality food on the planet, arguably. You can still eat too much of it. It is absolutely possible. Could you possibly eat more of it? Possibly. Significantly? I don't know. Maybe over time, like again, if you do this process where you increase your calories, but I don't think you're going to go from eating zero PUFA for eating a lot of PUFA in your regular foods to eating zero PUFA. Foods stay the same. Calories increase. You're going to still gain weight. So yeah, you have to do it slowly. That's really the only way to go about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes total sense. It's not what everybody wants to hear, especially because we've been so in this quick fix, 30 days to a beach body, whatever culture. But I think it's just really important to recognize at this point what absolute BS that is. And there's just no, developing the physique you want is a slow burn. And in a way, it's not that bad of a slow burn because, I'm very much in this, very much not at my goals, but I'm consistently feeling better every day and discovering, more athleticism, even at much higher body fat than I was when I was in an LEA at a quote unquote more attractive physique. My athleticism was worse than it is now. So it's a very interesting process.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And that's why I kind of like this lean bulk approach where it's like, look, just get your calories kind of dialed and then you can just leave. And I haven't gotten there. This is just a theoretical ideal that I'm working towards, but you can just leave, you have your lifting dialed in your workouts, which is easy for a lot of people once you're in the sphere. Like once you're trying to get into it, it's hard. But when you've been lifting for 10 years, you just don't really think about it. It becomes just part of your week to week life. Then get your calories to the same place where you're gaining a little bit of weight over time. If you're a guy and if you're trying to gain muscle, in your situation, you probably just want to increase your calories as high as you can without gaining weight, and then get ready to do another cut.
Okay, so let's talk about breakfast. Okay, so this is a real sticking point for a lot of men. I feel like the stress load has impacted the ability to have a morning appetite. And so there's a lot of guys that are walking out the door in the morning to very challenging jobs, whether those are blue collar physical labor jobs or white collar jobs that still carry a lot of stress and responsibility and mental load. And they're walking out of the door unfueled. And, us wives are standing there with a bagel with an egg on it being like, please, but they're like, no, I don't feel hungry, so I won't eat. I don't feel hungry, so I refuse to put food into my mouth when I don't feel hunger. So what would you say to that?
So Kathleen and I did a podcast and she wrote a great article on this, which inspired the podcast, talking about like the 4 low energy availability patterns. And the major one that I have seen is essentially binging at night and then not being hungry in the morning. And I think this comes down like there's a point that everyone knows where you are so ravenous that Susie's no longer home, right? I don't care what are the consequences because I'm going to eat this chipwich. I'm going to eat this steak no matter what. Like it doesn't matter. I'm not making any good decisions. It's just get food in my body. And then after you ate the 3rd plate of wings, you're like, I'm going to regret this tomorrow. Oh, so that is, I think, what's happening with a lot of people today, and they fill up on typically high processed, highly palatable foods. So things like chips and whatever, crap. Not that, again, these things can't have a time and place, but you don't want them to be a mainstay of your diet. And the issue specifically with fatty food, and this is what you see with the keto diet, you don't get hungry for a very long time because fat takes a very long time to digest. When you're on keto diet, you kind of self-regulate your blood sugar because you don't have an increase or decrease. It's just flat all the time, which is problematic, but we're not going to get into that. So you get hungry for maybe 2 meals a day. Maybe some people eat 3 steaks a day, but generally there's not a lot of hunger. I think the same thing's happening when people eat this really high fat meal. And this is relative to the person. Like it could be 80 grams, 100 grams. For some people, it could be 30 for a smaller individual. And then they're just not hungry in the morning. You want to be hungry in the morning. Now, how do you combat that? It depends on the person, because if someone recognizes that this is a problem, they can start working towards this. In the case of the husband with a loving wife trying to stuff the bagel in their mouth, they clearly don't recognize the problem. And it might not be a problem for them in like their context and their goals. I would say trying to shift their dinners to a more high carbohydrate meal rather than a fattier meal can be useful. The other issue though is that they might just end up pulling out more chips because they didn't get that bolus of calories that they wanted. So the way you want to think about this is, my old boss, Jaden Miller, used to say this, and it took a while for it to set in, but I think it's a really good analogy. You want your metabolism to be like a Porsche or a monster truck. You want it to run hard, and then you want it to run out quickly. You don't want it to be a Prius where it's just kind of constant, steady. You can get all the way across the country on a single load of gas. So you want to be hungry in the morning, you want to be ravenous for lunch, and then you want to be hungry for dinner. There's the three H's, the happy, hungry, horny, are all great signs. And I think those tend to, no one gets horny looking at a Prius. Come on. So I'm joking around here, but so you want to have that sign. Like being hungry in the morning is a great sign. It's one of the things we look for in our fat loss program, Transform. Like once people are getting hungry in the morning, we're like, great, let's start increasing your calories is more, or we should take this as a sign as that it's working. You can get people to start consuming food in the morning, even if they're not hungry, if they're willing to do that. If they're like, I have to run out the door, I'm not a breakfast person, whatever. Maybe this is the time you just get them a protein shake and make it really delicious. I have like a chocolate milk recipe, which you can add protein to, and you get, 30, 40 grams of protein, getting 100 something calories of carbohydrates, which isn't great, but it's better than nothing for sure.
What?
And they could take that on the road with them. And eventually they will probably start getting more and more hungry. And then they might want, hey, I'm going to have the bagel. Hey, the protein shake's not enough. We start doing breakfast, and you have to slowly transition it there. If you're someone, again, that does recognize the importance of this, you can just say, I'm going to start eating breakfast. But the issue is people don't see any error in their ways, and they currently aren't having an issue. So you got to pick your battle sometimes.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. I like what you mentioned about the Prius. But sorry to any Prius owners out there. You know who you are, okay? You're good. But not all of us choose the Prius lifestyle. But what you said about taking a bio-individual approach to the individual person, I like the idea of being able to hand your loved one something as they rush out the door, because, if you have to be at a work site at 7 a.m., you don't necessarily want to get up at, 5:15 to cook a hot breakfast. Maybe you're getting up at 6 a.m., just quickly getting dressed, grabbing something and going. That's a lot more realistic. And then thirdly, that piece about that maybe, if the person doesn't really recognize that they have a problem, but you as the wife or the girlfriend believe that they do, you're getting into really sticky territory here, because I think sometimes women actually do have a really good read on what their husbands or boyfriends need, because we are sensitive to everyone around us and observational and curious, and we have that tend and befriend instinct to kind of be that mother hen just taking care of everyone. And that can be really beautiful and wonderful, but also that can go totally out of control to where you are now mothering your loved male partner, acting like his mom, nagging him, being totally ridiculous. And that's just not right. Nobody wants that, and that's not okay. So I think as women listeners, we really need to recognize in ourselves, when are we being a loving caretaker of our spouse, and when have we gone across the line to being too bossy or too controlling. Really, it comes down to being controlling, and that's just not going to lead to a good relationship long term.
Yeah,
at all.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're cooking for the family and you choose to cook in this way, I think your husband can kind of zip it essentially because you're doing that work and that's where you're pulling your weight in the family. But there definitely comes a line where like essentially you are kind of manipulating him. And I think there's good and bad manipulation. Like that's just everything we do is manipulation when we are in a relationship. It's trying to get certain outcomes, and that like, it's a very negative word or it's perceived very negatively, but I think it's the reality of the situation. You can make him feel loved and you can make him feel unloved. So take that as you will, but it's probably better to have these kind of conversations outright. Just say like,
Yeah.
hey, look, would you try this for a few weeks and see if you feel any better? It would mean a lot to me. And if you don't, then I'll zip it.
Yeah, I love that. And I also remember what you said earlier that men do have, in general, compared to women, more of a logical mindset, which is awesome. And so you have to try to appeal to this more from a logical perspective rather than from an emotional slash hysterical vibe. You're going to get more flies with honey than you are with vinegar, right?
Yeah.
Okay. One more question I want to get into. How to push back on the sugar is bad mindset in an intelligent and thoughtful way.
Okay. So I really like to point out, well, why is sugar bad? Because if you don't have enough blood sugar in your body, you will die. Like, you will go into a coma.
Oh my,
What's it called? Anhedonic shock. Essentially, if your blood glucose gets too low, you will die. And your body has a lot of processes that prevent it. One of them is breaking down your liver's glycogen stores, which is, essentially your good way of doing that. And when that is empty, you start to break down your own muscle tissue because protein becomes easier to break down into glucose. Eventually, fats tend to become more ketones. That's to augment more of the lack of glucose intake, so that you don't have to run as much on glucose as you normally would. So when people look at sugars, they tend to think of like cookies and cupcakes, which again, I don't think are inherently bad, but a lot of times most of their carbohydrate sources that they're thinking of are fats. Like a cookie, if a cookie was a carbohydrate, it would be the main constituent of my diet. I can promise you. Who I would have a breakfast, lunch, and dinner cookie, and I would probably drink purely protein shakes. I'm joking. So, but like you have to ask, like, okay, well, so are potatoes bad? And, like, what is bad? And is it the Wheaties? Is it the Pop Tart? Is orange juice bad? Why is orange juice bad? And then you need to hear them out and say, why do you think that's bad? A lot of times they won't have thought that through. They just have heard sugar is bad, and you can say, well, I think natural sugars are good. But it's like, do you think oranges are bad? Maybe orange juice is bad because, squeezing it makes bad juju. But it uh or like whole fruit. Okay, we can agree on whole fruit. And then do you think potatoes are bad? Well, French fries are bad. So yep, okay. So we just bake the potatoes. And you can say, all right, again, we want to have enough energy. So carbohydrates are our body's main source of energy, and our body tends to run on carbohydrates. Our brain makes about 2% of our body weight, takes about 20% of our daily metabolic intake, our total daily energy expenditure. And your brain uses somewhere along the lines of like 80% glucose. So your brain really relies on glucose. Your muscles burn fat at rest, but when they're actually performing, they require a lot of glucose. And I think this is really interesting, kind of a tangent, but if you look at endurance athletes today, the best endurance athletes are consuming somewhere along the lines of, I forget exactly the statistic, but I think it's like 2 Cokes an hour. I think it's like 200, might be like 200 calories of carbohydrates per hour. I think it's more when they're running endurance events. And
So
then,
do you mean they're with like little gel packs or something?
yeah,
Or yeah, yeah.
yeah. So sugar packs, drinks, I've been doing, I'll do like lemonade and cranberry juice with some added sugar. And
Uh-huh.
I think that's just because their body's able to tolerate so much carbohydrates because they're just cycling it. Their mitochondria are on rapid fire.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think you just have to make the appeal that carbohydrates tend to do a lot of good things when they're the right types of carbohydrates in the right amount and that you process them well.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, we've had that sugar is bad messaging for such a long time, but you've got to kind of parse that apart. Are we talking about the added sugars in processed foods? Are we talking about these kind of metabolic swamp foods that combine high fat and high sugar? Or are we talking about, you know, maple syrup, etc.?
Yeah.
What about white table sugar?
Yeah, so I like to draw the argument. Well, it's that sugar in the Pop Tart is the same as the sugar in your orange juice, right? Like sugar is a molecule of glucose and a molecule of fructose. And people either just don't believe me, which I don't know what to do at that point. I still haven't figured that argument out. But that's scientifically like what it is. If you look up sugar, which is sucrose, you will get it's 1 part glucose and 1 part fructose. There are like high fructose corn syrup and other things that are a little bit different. But look, for the most part, honey has very slight benefits. Like I would put probably honey as number one. I would put maple syrup as number two, and then I would put white table sugar as number three. This isn't like honey and maple syrup are not significantly better than white table sugar, in
Uh-huh.
my opinion. Like from a nutrient density perspective, they are about the same. Maple syrup is not a good source of micronutrients. Honey is not a good source of micronutrients. Like if you were to eat 5,000 calories of any of them, I don't think you would hit your micronutrients in any micronutrient. So they're all the same. And white sugar is the same as the sugar in your orange, the same sugar is in your juice, and the same sugar is in your cupcake. The question is then, what does that sugar come with? And you have to look, is sugar bad? In some contexts, yes, because I drink, I'm going to try and get my calories to way above 4,000. That's currently kind of my goal. Well, I don't need a lot more whole food carbohydrates. And actually, at some point, if I try to eat 3,000 calories of potatoes a day, my digestion is not going to be able to keep up. Where I may benefit from more calories, more energy, and the easier way to get that, the less friction of getting that, is simple carbs like sugars. So that could be maple syrup, that could be juice, that could be lemonade. And in my workout, like I'll consume adding carbs that way is a really easy way to do it, especially if you work a construction job or your husband does jiu-jitsu. Highly recommend. Easy way to get carbs is like just drink some juice during it and you will probably feel a lot better. Or you got to play with the juice because orange juice tends to be a little bit thick, but cranberry juice, lemonade tend to be great. And one more thing, so you just have to look at the context because sugar is bad in some contexts. When if you're not hitting your micronutrients, you don't need to be getting lemonade. That's just a fact. If you're not, your diet should be mainly whole foods, but you need to be getting enough calories first to like have sugar as the added bonus.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Then we're getting into that micronutrient conversation where micronutrients being vitamins and minerals, macronutrients being protein, carbohydrates, and fats. So we're trying to marry the two in a divine union of nutrition. And that can be an interesting work in progress, especially if you're going from, whatever your starting point is. That can be a lot harder or easier. And what your lifestyle is. If you're on the go a lot, um, you just have to work with where you're at. And I do really appreciate you brought that into the conversation several times. We don't need to be perfect. We can work with where we're at. And there's just a time and a place for all these things. And that can change over time as well.
Yeah, yeah. The issue some people get into when they come into health is they try to just completely overhaul their entire life, whereas you really just want to try and take one thing away from this podcast. And like an easy thing you can take away is like, look, add 50 calories of carbohydrates to your workout drink. Instead of just water, add a little bit of sugar to it. And it might
Mhm.
taste, or juice, and it might taste better. And then you're easily getting the extra 50 calories and see, all right, is my weight increasing over the next few weeks? All right, let's add a little bit more and keep going like that and just try and be very scientific and methodical about it.
Yeah, I love that. Okay.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Tyler. Just really appreciate you taking the time to come on today and hope that seems like we're getting some snow. So you're going to have some great conditions.
I hope
Yeah.
so. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And thanks for anyone that listened that made it out all the way out
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, of course. Ladies, I hope you got something out of this wonderful conversation with Tyler. I really appreciated how he mentioned that maybe sometimes, even if we think our husbands need some extra help, maybe they don't also see it that way. And we have to respect their sovereignty, respect their personal bodily autonomy. And there can be a fine line between being helpful and being controlling. And I think I'm emphasizing that point because that's something that I personally am challenged with sometimes in my relationship. Furthermore, in so many ways, women and men are not as different as we've been led to believe. I'm always drawn back to that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you've got like food and shelter, community, and then you can get to these higher realms. But truthfully, men and women both need these basics. And once you've got those down, the sky's the limit with being creative, being successful, and just having a lot of fun in life. But those basics of those healthy habits, routine, nourishment, they are simple, but they are not easy because it's a daily grind and nobody's going to do it for you. Unless you are the amazing wife I think you are, and you're going to do this for your husband and he's up for it. The reverse dieting concept that Tyler got into is really interesting as well, where you're tracking your food and then slowly building your calories up by about 25 calories per day per week. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Tyler. We are here. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, have a wonderful day.